You know, it's been about a week and a half since I've shaved my face, and this is about the extent to what I can expect from my hair growth. What's going on, guys? Do you also suffer from a lack of hair growth, whether it's on your face or are you balding up on the top of your head? If you are in that category of people, then you are going to love this interview here today because I had the opportunity to talk with Andrew from Hair DAO. Hair DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization in the world of decentralized science that is aiming to solve hair loss forever for all of humanity. If that sounds intriguing to you, then you are in the right place at the right time, my friend. Go ahead and watch this video through because we talk about many of the projects that they are currently funding in the world of decentralized science. We also talk about different use cases for their token, which I personally didn't even realize were viable use cases. So buckle up and get ready for this interview. I think the best way to start this interview off is to ask, what is Hair DAO and kind of how did it initiate? Where did it come from?
Yeah, definitely. So me and my other co-founder, whose name is also Andrew Baxt, we were focused in crypto for a while. We were both investing in crypto. And I think we were just really underwhelmed by sort of the lack of like real world applications that we saw, and also just kind of the way people were building in the space. We both saw Vita DAO, which was sort of a really groundbreaking kind of aha moment for us. Like, wow, this is really cool. People using crypto to innovate in the real world. And unfortunately, we were both suffering from hair loss. I started like really thinning pretty badly on my temples in college when I was 20. I'm 28 now. And then Bax, we called him Patches in high school because he was sort of a diffuse thinner like throughout the entirety of his head. And we both had always kind of talked about, like why this can't be like such a hard problem to solve. Like it's these like little hairs on the outside of your head. You're not doing surgery on the heart or the liver or something where there's a lot of risk at play. So why isn't this being solved? And I think Vita DAO, what they really tapped into was this lack of early stage research funding, really just derived by this like arbitrary classification on pretty much saying, longevity isn't a disease, therefore the NIH doesn't fund it. And likewise, what we realized was hair loss is a cosmetic condition, therefore the NIH doesn't fund it. Only $5 million of annual global funding for hair loss early stage R&D, despite the fact that it is, an incredibly important issue to so many people, particularly young men and women who lose their hair. It's so tied up into identity and can cause, big depression and really mess with people, particularly when they lose it early on. So we set off to see, can we combine kind of our two passions, solving our own hair loss with our passion for crypto, see if we could do something cool.
It's very interesting to see that it doesn't receive any funding because it's not classified as a disease, despite like half the population of the earth. Maybe I'm exaggerating with half a little bit, but a large chunk of the population is dramatically affected by some form of hair loss. So
over 60% of people at some point in their lives will deal with a form of hair loss, whether it's men or women.
So I'm not even dragging that out. It is literally more than half of the population is going to be affected. And yet you said it receives $5 million in funding?
$5 million globally for early stage R&D funding. I think that's pretty wild when you then look at sort of the success at companies like Hims and Row, who are spending, who are making tons and tons of money pretty much selling the existing treatment set, which many people find incredibly underwhelming, but there just shows this massive demand. There we go.
A little bottle of minoxidil here.
Yeah, for stuff that either doesn't work that well or causes, wild side effects that I think it shows how badly people want their hair when they put their own fertility at risk, risk actually like being chronically depressed, all of these things just to keep their hair on their head. So why don't we hear their call for help and develop some better solutions?
Which is the literal exact use case for decentralized science. All of these DAOs that are being formed are to service underfunded areas of research in which there are potential products that have been researched and studied, but yet to actually come to light as a product that you can go buy on the shelf. And so you guys coming to bridge that valley of death, as everyone refers to it, is perfect. I'd love if we could get into either your background, or maybe we can jump straight into some of the studies that you guys actually have like on the ground running.
Yeah. So I guess my background, my co-founder Bax, he was sort of product design from Stanford, so more of a product, and then became a crypto investor pretty early on. And then I also actually had more of a finance background, but as you suffer, hair loss, as suffer hair loss yourself, you start doing more and more research, going down the rabbit hole. And what I've been very pleasantly surprised by is when you create an organization like Hair DAO, it creates this gravitational pull where smart people also looking to solve the same problem kind of come your way, and it helps you learn a topic much more quickly than you would have otherwise. So we've been at this for 2 years now, and I've actually spent the last 3 or 4 months or so actually working in Ralph Paus's lab at the University of Miami, which is the top hair loss researcher in the world. So it's funny how quickly I've gone down the hair loss rabbit hole, particularly since starting Hair DAO. And then you wanted to touch on some of the projects we had going on?
Yeah, it's funny. There's literally no turning back for you now. You've already rooted yourself, pun intended, too far into the industry. It's interesting to me hearing like somebody like yourself who is working in laboratories with the top hair loss researchers globally, and people are still trying to fade this entire movement as if it's just a giant money grab. And yet the people actually doing the research and participating in the actual movement are not even paying attention to how crypto usually functions. But
yeah, I mean, the one point I'll make is this is the type of problem. I think the Z Prime guys wrote an article where they said like do it yourself is the vibe, and I couldn't emphasize that enough. That this is solving hair loss is totally a do it yourself kind of movement, because one, it's very complicated as we're learning fast, but it's less complicated than solving a lot of other conditions out there. So it actually is doable by sort of these citizen scientist types. But then also I would just remark, like I've been, I've now had the opportunity to speak to, several of the sort of the quote unquote top hair loss researchers. And one thing that disappoints me a lot is this like defeatist attitude that exists where it's like, we say our mission is to solve hair loss, particularly androgenetic alopecia. And a lot of people like that's such a big goal. Like you'll never solve hair loss. Like how about your mission is to, reduce it a little bit or like slow it down. And it's like, is that really who you want, solving your condition, the person who doesn't even think it's possible? And I would say, unfortunately, that attitude is quite prevalent across the traditional sphere. And if you hop into the Hair DAO Discord, I think you'll actually see, outside of people complaining about their hair loss, a lot more optimism that we'll actually get there one day.
Do you think, a little bit of a difficult question, do you think this is due to blind optimism, where it's a lot of people who are suffering from the disease and hope that something will happen? Or do you think it is like some level of informed optimism?
I think it's very informed optimism, actually. So, we obviously we had Ralph on the podcast saying that the Hair DAO community members were actually more informed than many of the traditional hair loss researchers that he knew, like at universities with tenure. So I'd say the knowledge pool of people and the conversations that are going on are like quite literally the cutting edge of hair loss research. Based on what I've seen in the lab and everything, I would say there's been so much of this. There's such an existing machine of how research is done through universities and via the grant process, and then how people are kind of constantly like almost search engine optimizing for the research they're going to pursue to get cited more often, rather than actually pursuing research that has the highest chance of solving some sort of condition. And so I think when you come into it as less from the traditional sphere, you fall into a lot less of the traps that exist in sort of conventional thinking within the space. You're able to look at it more holistically, look at things like, for example, like why does running early stage research cost like damn near $300,000 for something that, the cost of the physical cost of what's going into this product is relatively very little. So like where are these massive charges coming from? And I think when you look at that and you take a different perspective, I think a lot more is possible than people who have been just ingrained in this traditional science world can appreciate.
Yeah, especially not to diss academia too much, but you go through the entire like 4-year, 8-year academic process, and you get told a lot of things that just are no, because that's not how we do things, or you just get introduced to all the bureaucracy right from the beginning because nobody's used to disrupting it. And so it's good to see a lot of people coming maybe with not that strongly rooted of a background, but still that ambition to research because they're driven from actually suffering from it to hit the ground running and test things and do things at home. I like that a lot. Just like everyone who's watching this right now should like this video, subscribe, and I will put all of the socials for Hair DAO in the description below. So go check them out. Give them a follow if you are also suffering from hair loss or know a loved one who's impacted. I'd love to...
One point I would say, yeah, the bureaucracy at these institutions, you grow up in it, you go through like your long PhD process or whatever it is, and the bureaucracy becomes the air you breathe, where you become adapted to it and you don't even realize it exists anymore. To the point where there are things that you hold as true, which could really be and unchangeable, which could really be rethought.
Limiting beliefs. Everyone has them. It's just a matter of sometimes it takes a set of like naked eyes to spot them for you. I would love to get into some of the studies now. I know that you yourself, if I can expose you like this, are testing a product, testing something on your own hair treatment.
Yeah. So, so this was the very first study we ran, which was with Ralph Paus at the University of Miami. I was on the bench for the ends of this study, which was exciting. I was obviously tipped off on that the results were looking positive on the human scalp skin biopsy. So our first treatment is this topical thyroid hormone based formulation. We tested it on human scalp skin biopsies.
Off the body or on the body?
Off the body, in little petri dishes. And the results, difficult to know what I'm allowed to say, but the results were encouraging enough that I feel confident rubbing it on my own head. And so now we're doing a small little observational study in 5 to 10 people in Florida, where because this medication is approved orally at much higher dosages for a hypothyroidism, when you're underactive thyroid gland, we're allowed to have doctors prescribe it off-label to us, and we will be, myself included and my co-founder, we'll be taking pictures of our scalps to measure sort of target area hair count, target area hair width, while also sort of taking blood tests to just see, are we doing anything crazy to our blood biomarkers, and then are we actually improving the amount of hair in the area. So that's a great proof of concept that we can, we filed our patent on that. That was the first patent in DSI, which we were really first filed patent in DSI, which we were really excited about. That using that model, we've since been able to really kind of turn HairDAO into a bit of a platform and hoping this year to go full steam ahead. So far we already have 4 different studies that we're running in parallel, actually, each which have their own associated treatment with them. So do you want me to just maybe briefly touch on each of them?
I have a question about the current one that you were just talking about. Yep. So you're taking a medication that has already been used in significantly higher doses to orally, which generally has like a more broad impact on the body, because like when you take something orally, it has to be digested through your liver and your intestines and your stomach and everything. And the goal is to impact the thyroid for thyroids that can't produce enough of the natural hormones to keep hair growing, right? So the idea is taking that product and just bypassing all of that to go right on the scalp and directly impact the follicles themselves. So this would work topically across anything, right? And it would be a much, hopefully, obviously you have to go through the entire scientific process to see if there's a less of an impact, but that's kind of the idea here.
Yeah, that's the idea. Little known fact, but hair follicles produce thyroid hormones locally. So, not actually not just coming from the thyroid gland, from actually within the structure of the hair follicle. And so mechanism of action still remains a bit unclear, but it's probably some sort of, mitochondria metabolism type deal where you're essentially giving the cells more energy to reproduce. And there's a couple other mechanisms of actions that we're exploring in association to it. But yeah, that's the gist. We'll apply it topically to make sure it gets as much to the hair follicles and as little to the rest of the body as possible.
Fascinating.
And that's what we're doing.
Do most of the studies have a similar structure of that, where there was already something in existence that worked and you guys are just trying to find a different mechanism, different route?
Yeah, we have I would say a nice little split. So we're running another study on thyroid hormone receptor, thyrotropin releasing hormone, TRH, which is similar. It's actually registered as a cosmeceutical on a couple lists. We then have a different study where we're testing dutasteride topically in pig skin. Actually, dutasteride is prescribed very widely to treat hair loss orally, but it's like finasteride on superpowers, where its hair growth effects are really strong, but then all of the side effects like infertility, anxiety, depression, erectile dysfunction, all that stuff, that's also tends to be on steroids. So what we're looking to do is develop a topical, actually compare apples to apples in pigskin, a bunch of different delivery vehicles, to essentially optimize for the one that maximizes hair follicle targeting specificity. So getting it to the bulb of the hair follicle, which a lot of treatments actually won't penetrate the top layer of the skin, or they'll just have a massively high dosage that gets through the skin and then gets all to the surrounding vasculature, goes systemic, and causes the same side effects as if you had just taken the pill yourself. So we're trying to sort of do an apples-to-apples comparison and develop a vehicle that will maximize hair growth effects while limiting the side effects. And then the final one, which we just did on our own podcast, Harry Matters, we just did an interview with Dr. Barghouthi, who's a hair transplant surgeon in Jordan, testing verteporfin on when he gives hair transplants, injecting it into the donor area. So in a hair transplant, you essentially extract hairs from the back of your head and implant them into wherever you're missing hair up top here. Typically those are limited by you only have so much hair back here, so you can't just do a limitless hair transplant. With verteporfin, what the initial results look really encouraging is that it limits scarring, which then allows for hair follicle regeneration. So if we're able to help him sort of scale, a verteporfin formulation, hair transplant doctors could essentially give limitless hair transplants, because you would keep having this area back here regrowing to keep adding more hair to wherever it was missing up top.
Just an infinite hair loop, as long as you can reduce the scarring from the treatments.
Yep. And don't get me wrong, that's a very expensive infinite hair loop, but at least it's a loop that exists if we can make it work.
Right. That's fascinating. I'm curious, and this is more personal, but why does the top of the head go bald where the back of the head is not suffering from that same fate? It just can continue to produce hair.
Yeah, so that's donor dominance theory. And I guess long story short, it's nobody knows 100% sure why. And this is, again, probably a result of the lack of, basic research that's been done in the space. But sort of the prevailing theory is essentially that for whatever reason, the hair follicles on the side of your head, this sort of the back of your head, the donor site, they're immune to the sex hormones that cause androgenic alopecia throughout the rest of the body. So the main cause is this dihydrotestosterone, DHT, which is a substrate of testosterone gets broken down, binds to the hair follicles and causes the miniaturization and eventual loss for whatever reason, which we still need to figure out. And this is why actually in the future, we're doing a lot of our testing to look at, how a follicle reacts to a certain drug from the back of your head, but also how that follicle reacts to a certain drug from the front of your head. Because there's clearly some difference there. And we had yet to figure it out, but we will, hopefully.
Yeah, you got to split the studies into 2 different groups so that you don't just rub it all over your hair. You just specific treatment sections.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because, one of the preclinical testing models is to extract a singular follicle, dump something on it, and then do something like immunohistochemistry or something to read out protein expression. But it's how telling are your results if, the hair that you're testing would never miniaturize in the first place, because, it's you're not really who cares?
Yeah,
what that would never miniaturize would do. You want to see what it does on a hair that would miniaturize.
Plus, you're removing it from its entire environment, so I'm sure there's other impacts too. Not on a short time frame, but you just don't know.
Absolutely, there's a lot of stuff where I think the perfect example is minoxidil. If you test minoxidil if you test it just on a follicle in isolation, it causes hair loss. But once you have that follicle within the skin, then it starts to help with hair growth. So that's why ultimately the best preclinical model is actually human scalp skin, but it's obviously harder to obtain. And
you got to have the guinea pigs ready to go. You got to have a group of people who are suffering from it and want to contribute. Now, I think you bring up a good thing there, a good segue almost. And I have the minoxidil right here. And you just said that in isolation, if you were to remove the entire hair follicle and test it, it actually shows hair loss. Now, in an area of science that is so underfunded, you would think that that would be a failure in research and people would have given up on minoxidil after seeing a study like that, recreating the study exactly and showing that it caused hair loss. But because that's not how scientific research goes, and even a failed research study might contribute to the overall body of research and kind of guide things in a correct direction, a lot of people bring up questions of what happens if all of the research that is being conducted from one of these or funded by Hair DAO was to show no promising results. Do you try and change up the study a little bit and shift away from maybe we just isolated the hair and we need to have it in its environment? Or how do you kind of approach that? Do you give up on it?
Yeah, so that's a good point. I think it's funny because, the reason we know minoxidil works is not from any real preclinical work regarding hair loss. It's because it was being used to treat hypertension, and people started noticing, hair growth. And likewise, finasteride was being used to treat enlarged prostates. And then all of a sudden people said, oh, my hair is also coming back. So those are perfect examples. The 2 real, only existing, real drugs that we have, FDA approved drugs we have to solve hair loss, neither of them went through this preclinical model. They were essentially discovered by mistake. That's a big, Hair DAO, we're open source, community driven, and we want, there's obviously less value accrual if your study does not show that you have a new hair loss treatment, but there's still a ton of value for the space and for patients, which we all are, in terms of making bad data very clear. This is where the hair token comes into play. It's a governance token. And so I would say, hair token holders would look at the data and they would say, is this study promising enough that even though we got bad data, we want to run a follow-up study in human scalp skin? That would be up for hair token holders to vote on. There are some cases where people are like, this is not the most exciting, but it could be helpful. And so, if the initial data is bad, they might let it drop, but they will publicize it and say, if anybody else finds this interesting, you go have a crack at it. But then there are other studies where we've done so much more research on, we're so much more bullish on. We have a couple that are really, really exciting. And some initial bad data in a hair follicle might be hard for us to just let it drop so easily.
Yeah. But that's the whole use case behind the DAO governance, is having those tokens. People always ask why have crypto? Other than funding, it's a good tool for democratizing voting. And so how long ago did you guys launch the governance? How long has the hair token been in circulation?
Yeah, so I believe, let's see, I believe we launched it in February of, it was like late February of 2022, I believe. Yeah. No, 2023. And so, yeah, we did a fair launch.
Coming up on the happy birthday.
Yeah, exactly. We did a fair launch where we on a Gnosis auction sold 100% of the total supply. Everybody bought in at the same time, myself included. And yeah, that's the story there.
Nice. I think the SEC, at least in the United States, has been very clear that you need to do fair launches, or you need to have no pre-mining or anything like that in order for it to be a solid line. I know they haven't given much regulatory clarity at all, and hopefully we get it in the not too distant future so that everyone can just progress forward together. But I think that is the smart way to have gone about the initial launch, is just doing it in a fair and equitable manner. What were some of the struggles that you guys have been facing thus far in either gaining community, gaining adoption, or just initially creating and sourcing some of the research?
Yeah, I mean, I think an initial problem or challenge that we had to face was that neither my co-founder or I had sort of bio backgrounds, and so it took like a lot of aggressive workload of just reading as much as possible, getting up to speed as fast as possible, really just immersing ourselves in what the problems were, everything like that. And I think, still learning, but feel like I should always still be learning. But feel like, it's pretty crazy to me to even think about how much I've learned in this space and how much I've grown in terms of my understanding. And I think it's starting to really pay dividends to have that sort of knowledge in-house versus having to go out every time you want to ask a question, go out to, the traditional researcher or whatever it may. And I think taking the time to really learn about the indication and how we would solve it ourselves, not just looking for somebody else to come up with the solution, is really going to pay long-term dividends. I think this next phase that we're starting to enter, like I said, we have 5 really cool projects that we're working on, which could have real-world impact very soon. And so I think it's definitely been a transition. We have an incredibly knowledgeable community, and now I think we're really looking to get the word out. And so that's been an experience, just like how do you spread the word when you're doing cool stuff?
It's not as easy as it might seem. The marketing side of things often gets overlooked, but it is not as simple as just, we'll put it out and everyone will come flocking.
Yeah, it's exactly been our experience.
One of the questions that my dad actually had when I was trying to explain decentralized science to him was, why would a scientist who is conducting a study and coming up with the intellectual property at the end, which is the results, why would they be willing to give up that IP into the Treasury and like give up ownership over their hard work? And I think with you guys, with the studies in which you're grabbing as many people out and doing like a larger cohort study, I think it's more advantageous because there's less likely to be that one centralized person who is like not really interested in giving up the IP. But not all of the studies are going to be like that.
No, I mean, absolutely. So first of all, first of all, I think in hair loss in particular, and it's true for a lot of other indications, but for us, it's crazy. Like we raised, roughly in total about $3.3 million. Then our ETH holdings went up. So now we're at like 3.8 million, whatever. And then when you compare that to annually, there's $5 million of hair loss, early stage R&D spend a year. It's just hard to get funding. So in hair loss in particular, like there's very few other sources of funding. And so that's a big reason why they would come to us just right off the bat. Now also, these researchers, we give them ownership in their IP. And I think it's worth noting that, typically universities do take big chunks of the researcher's IP. So it's always it's on a university by university basis, but I'm always very surprised by how little of their own IP the researchers actually hold. Yeah, I mean those are the two main reasons. Like the funding is hard to come by. We provide a lot more than just funding. Is like, for example, like, getting the patents handled, getting the observational studies handled. A lot of the work that researchers are just don't want to do, quite frankly.
Yeah. Money talks. If you can reduce that friction from a 10-month period of begging for money down to a 6 to 8 week or even a 10-week period.
Yeah, absolutely.
Money talks.
And then, I mean, like, to be honest, in hair loss, like a lot of researchers who are doing studies, like, they're not even familiar with like the best disease models to test on and stuff like that. So like it's for at least us, I would say, of our first 5 studies we'll be running, I think 3 out of the 5 are actually internally generated, and we're going to labs more so just to handle out the physical work of carrying out like the IP and the ideas that have been generated literally within our Discord server. And we just say like, hey, do you know how to use run that human scalp skin model? Can you test these couple compounds on human scalp skin and tell us what the data says? So in many cases, it's like the ideas are actually coming from within the server as well. So it's, we're not necessarily out to researchers and begging them to give us their IP.
It's a very different model than everyone is used to. Rather than the researchers coming, you're sourcing the researchers to do some of the work. You brought up the Treasury here a moment ago, and it had escaped my mind that in one of the videos I had made about you guys, I was giving you shit about having so much Ethereum in the Treasury. But look who was right, you guys. The price keeps going up. You had said earlier that you have a finance background, and so I'm curious if there will be a proposal eventually to kind of segue out of Ethereum as the market continues to get more zesty, bubblicious, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I mean, so just to explain that, like our thinking, I think right now we've got something like 3 million of ETH and like 700K of USDC or something like that. And so our thinking is like HairDAO runs on Ethereum, and particularly when it was at like $1,600 or something like that. Our thinking was HairDAO runs on Ethereum, and if Ethereum legitimately like fails or breaks or whatever, and the price goes to zero, like HairDAO is done for anyways, really. So how much more additional risk are we taking by holding ETH on our balance sheet from a price perspective? Because we have this USDC to get us through any periods of volatility. And then, in terms of hedging, if he continues to go up in the future, I'll let shareholders decide. I'm a bit of an ETH maxi myself, and we experienced like it was scary when we were holding USDC and Silicon Valley Bank. It was rumored that they had a lot of the assets backing USDC in their in their bank account. So we'll see. I mean, I think 2024 has the potential to be a crazy year, and the things we think are safe might be less safe than expected. So that's what I'll say.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to unpack in that. Like for those of you who are watching and don't remember, we're coming up on about a year ago when Silicon Valley Bank, the largest VC bank over in California, over in Silicon Valley with all the tech hubs, they went bankrupt because they held too many treasuries and interest rates went up too much, and the value of those treasuries plummeted because of that. And Circle, the creator of USDC, had a lot of their money backing USDC. I think it was about like 20% of the funding in Silicon Valley's bank. So when they went belly up, they had no more money. But we can always rely on the US government to come in and print some money again and hand it out to the big VCs. But another point, the volatility of Ethereum, I think is the main concern that I would have with holding it, because last cycle for in crypto, we saw Ethereum go from $80 up to $4,500, which is amazing for everyone who was holding that. But then subsequently, because everything works in that 4-year cycle, at least thus far, who knows if the the Bitcoin ETF changes that. And I know I'm getting into the weeds of crypto here, but Ethereum then fell from like $4,500 all the way down to $800, I think was the bottom.
Yeah.
And so that volatility means that any treasury, which is comprised almost entirely of Ethereum, while it might survive that, because Ethereum is probably going to survive, it would not be able to fund the same caliber of research moving forward because they just don't have the funds. So
No, totally.
perhaps like...
I think that's why it's totally important to keep a certain amount of stable coins on the balance sheet, whether it's 6 months of runway, a year of runway, whatever it may be.
Absolutely.
The bank term funding program, which shored all of that up, is expiring on March 11th. So we'll see what happens with the stable coins and the regional banks then. But yeah.
Oh, I did not. I got to write that down. I did not realize that it was expiring in March.
Yeah, who knows? They'll probably just say refund it or whatever, and say, yeah, we'll print money. We'll print limitless money to ensure the regional banks. But yeah, it'll be an interesting time to hold stable coins in particular that aren't at like JP Morgan or something.
Right. Coincidentally, that's about when the market thinks rate cuts are going to start coming in. So, here we go. I'm curious if you guys would be willing to share some of your roadmap here a little bit. Do you have any exciting things that people should be paying attention to coming up in the next couple months?
Yeah. So I would say, first outside of sort of pushing the 5 studies along that we talked about, really generating over the next 6 months, hopefully positive in vivo data for our first treatment. We'll have our next edition of Haircuts coming out in like a week or so, which is sort of like our publication. We talk about all the research we're doing, also give hairy rewards to our top contributors and stuff in that. One thing which is a bit further out, but I find particularly exciting that we're working on, is the potential of actually building out our own real world physical lab. Now this plan is a bit out. Like I would hope that we build something at least a year from now, at least a proof of concept for this lab. But based on what I've seen, the actual cost of the materials and the machines and what that you need to run sort of the premier hair loss disease model is relatively very cheap. And a big amount of the costs, and going back to like, why does this study cost $300,000? A big part of the cost is actually the personnel that you're hiring, and then also paying overhead to the universities. So a university charges, like say they charge 100% overhead. Oh, it would cost $150K, but because you're running it in our lab, the university takes $300K. I think there's a lot of potential through relatively common sense reorganization of the early stage research process to bring down the cost by about 10x, so from $300K down to $30K. And in doing so, you're able to generate 10 pieces of IP for the cost of one in the old world. And so I think hair loss is particularly like perfect for this form of disruption to see if it really works. And the goal there would be, we have so many ideas thrown around in our Discord server, things we could try. But when the cost of loading up for that study is $300K, you're requiring like a year's worth of due diligence, like all this stuff. You're turning down a lot of ideas that are good, but just not as good as, something else. And so if you can get to the point where, just trying random stuff is cheap enough, and instead of, effectively just getting reps in, just getting a ton of reps in, I think we'll come to some really cool breakthroughs very fast. I think the also kind of cool part of developing so much of this data on hair follicles and human scalp skin, it's a much easier, like recently alive human scalp skin, human sample to get than most other organs, and the hair follicles a mini organ. That it could create a really, really awesome, cool, human biological proprietary data set, which could actually even be useful for solving other conditions outside of hair loss. So that's the next really big thing on the roadmap outside of pushing these 5 existing studies that we have currently.
Yeah, I think an IRL lab would be very, very unique for any DeSci DAO to have. Would that be something that people could come in to and like explore on their own? Like, would it be open to the public so that your community members could contribute in some manner? Or is there like that liability threshold where it's like, we're going to have HCl or hydrochloric acid. We can't have you coming in here without proper training protocol and everything.
Maybe we'll just token gate it. Maybe we'll just token gate the lab, and above a certain threshold, you can come in. No, I mean,
another use case.
Yeah. Like details that we have to figure out, but I think including the community wherever absolutely possible should be a priority. 100%.
Absolutely. I love to hear it. You got to build out that community. Without community, there is no DAO. So definitely crucial to have that built out and robust.
Yeah, I've also seen a couple of these cool like Vitalia and these cool like sandbox cities and stuff like that. And so I do think it's worth noting. Anybody that watches this who's involved with one of those places, I'm definitely curious in discussing further, what the current setup of those places is like, because I do think places with more of a regulatory sandbox type environment, super cool and appealing.
It's fascinating to me that they like are able to pull stuff like that off. Like, it's often a criticism of having too much decentralization is that you can't pull things like that off. And so it's been fun to kind of watch multiple organizations like that or events like that pop up, especially in DeSci. I think Vitalia is a really, really unique concept. Vitalia is an entire city dedicated around decentralized science and longevity and trying to propel everyone forward. Not just in lifespan, but also health span. And part of your health span is your mental health span, which most people feel a lot more mentally secure when they have a full head of hair. So I see how it all ties in there now. You see it?
Exactly.
And I'm a little disappointed because last time we talked, I had a full head of hair that was down past my shoulders. It was approaching the bottom of my chest here. And then the barber rug pulled me and gave me a fade, which doesn't look bad, but it's not the same.
I tweeted at you, man. I was like, how are you going to get rid of those locks right before our interview?
I know. It was an accident. It was actually an accident. Speaking of community, I had my community vote what hairstyle I should get, and they said mullet. And then I went into the barber shop, and she did not give me a mullet. And I was like, you fucked me. I appreciate you coming on here. It means a lot, and I'm glad that we could have a platform to express all the cool things that Hair DAO is doing, and specifically what you guys are doing over there. You're really setting the groundwork and building something nice over there. Is there anything else that you want to highlight? Where can people find you at?
Yes. Well, first of all, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I've seen your DeSci content online. I was like, oh, this guy's like really putting out like high quality, like funny, good content. And as I said earlier, like I recognize how hard marketing is and making like great high quality content that's like clearly well thought out. Even your critiques of HairDAO, I was like, hey, he's not totally wrong. Like this is it's a good criticism. And so super awesome to have like you putting out work in the space. Discord is absolutely the home of where everything like really meaningful is happening in HairDAO these days. We are revamping our website to be a little bit more friendly to people who are new to HairDAO and trying to sort of learn about what we're getting up to. And so I would say to be on the lookout for that as well. It'll be a more comprehensive kind of like why HairDAO, how do you get involved, all that stuff.
I think we had kind of skimmed over on the hairy rewards as well. Is that something that they can find a lot of information on in the Discord?
Yeah, so we have we actually have this app in beta called Ready Play Hair 1. And it actually keeps track of everybody's contributions in the Discord, including sort of emojis and reactions to sort of gauge, are you just spamming the Discord or are you contributing stuff that's valuable? We then use that sort of algorithm to generate hair points, which then in our publication, which you can also find all 4 of them, within the Ready Player One app, but we use your hair points to sort of indicate how much hair you should get given, and we produce a haircuts about once a quarter. And so that's just and all the hair awarded in these haircuts is vesting. So we're able to kind of ensure long-term alignment with our community members, many of whom are anon, but are legitimately some of the smartest people I've ever met, and contribute like huge value that just would be getting lost in the random threads of Reddit if they weren't posting it in Hair DAO.
Yeah, you never know who's lurking. You really never know. That's why it's like, it's important to incentivize that reward, get people's attention like that. And
I've got theories that we've got like Jeff Bezos, like a non account or something. He doesn't want anybody to know we're solving hair loss, but he's like working in our Discord server or something like that. Because I'm like, you're clearly one of the smartest people in the world. Like and you have enough time to solve hair loss all day. So like there's something going on here.
yeah, you got to track the wallet, see if it's a mega whale. You got all the balding billionaires like, yo, I vibe with this.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm sure you could hear Floop there at the end. He was getting very anxious, wanted me to be done with that interview. That was a fantastic interview. Thank you so much, Andrew, again, for your time. As you know, your time's your most valuable asset. So if you found some value out of this, please go ahead and hit that like button, and I will see you guys in the next video.